Follow the White Rabbit is a game that will teach you practical politics. Practical politics is called practical politics because it is non-voting, which makes it very, very practical. Conventional politics is, of course, rule-based politics, which is what you do at the voting booth. It's very, very rule-based and timeline-based, every 4 years, every 2 years, so on and so forth. And full-spectrum practical politics is engaging and taking out an opponent or a system or a corporation, so on and so forth, by any means necessary under the rules or under the laws, but never breaking the rules or never breaking the laws. But to understand anything, we first have to teach you practical politics, which is non-voting politics. The first basics are the art of staying on point or using a talking point and being able to say it over and over again to make your point, not arguing, just making a point. But this is an introduction again to Follow the White Rabbit, and Follow the White Rabbit is a game that will teach you practical politics. In my first Follow the White Rabbit, I did several anomalies. Several blatantly obvious anomalies. I mentioned police officers several different times. I mentioned squad cars. I mentioned lone wolves. Everything was geared toward males. If any of that scared you, and you're a male, well, you're probably in a consensus trance. If you're an FBI agent or a police officer and it terrified you, this guy's saying in a squad car you should say Mexican for Mexicos, Africa for the Africans, white countries for everybody, and talking about squad cars, cops in squad cars playing Follow the White Rabbit, well, you're in a consensus trance. You're in a fear-based trance. Someone like me doesn't use velvet tactics with police and squad cars. They're too afraid. I did that to prove a point to you. I want you to look at yourself. If you're a lone wolf, steely-eyed lone wolfer, an undercover lover as I call them, and you're afraid that someone's giving you a talking point to come out, you should have nothing to be afraid of. You should know better than to open up your mouth. That's just common sense. If you're immediately afraid, that's not useful. Fear is when you don't know your environment. Fear happens when you're walking through Yellowstone and you don't know what a grizzly bear is. If you know what a grizzly bear is, you should be prepared. You shouldn't be afraid. You should be concerned, alert, whatever, but you shouldn't be afraid. There's nothing illegal about even an FBI agent or a police officer defending themselves verbally. There's nothing illegal about that, as long as you do it in a respectful way. They can't do anything about it. I did it to prove a point. I geared everything for males and police officers and squad cars to prove a point. The point was about consensus trance. Consensus fear-based trance, and how an easy way to evolve a fear-based trance. And a fear-based trance, a consensus trance, destroys reason. It destroys your ability to reason. You can't really think clearly. Immediately, maybe if you got a friend in a government agency and they were to analyze that, I said some big buzzwords that would set them off. I did that intentionally. Most of them are in dynamic conflict models. They immediately jump the gun on things. Well, if you know anything about velvet tactics, you know someone like me, if you're smart, you're going to know that someone smart like me never uses males. No, I don't. I wouldn't use males on squad cars. No way in the world would I use that to take over a government using velvet tactics. In fact, I only use females. Yeah, isn't that funny? White females, when you put the males in a fear-based trance, even in somewhere like China, they got all the Chinese males scared to death. Police officers scared to death. Government agents in China, males scared to death. Next thing you know, the females basically become fearless. Right now in America, if you look at the crime statistics, you would think these white females are naive or crazy. No, they're just fearless. In my opinion, they've always been like that. But for some reason, when you put the males in a fear-based trance, the females become fearless. They're not afraid of anything. And they're very difficult to brainwash. Males are a lot easier to put in a fear-based trance. Females are a lot more difficult to brainwash, and they're a lot more difficult to put in a fear-based trance. You basically have to put white females in a terror squad. You have to do something like that because they don't have any fear. A lot of you think they're just being naive or they're just being crazy. Some of them are. Some of them are just young and naive. Some of them are foolish. Some of them are stupid. But a lot of them are just fearless. They don't have any fear. And just because someone looks at a Vogue magazine is ready to buy a Louis Vuitton, they're very fashionable. Being fashionable and being brainwashed is not the same thing. I'm going to go into that a little bit more, but I did all that with males to prove one point. And I'm always going to try to make a point with you because that's the objective. The point is to go into ethnic conflict models and dynamic conflict models. The point was for me to prove my point. And I want you to look at it yourself. On the other hand, if you're one of those undercover lovers, one of those steely-eyed lone wolfers, and you heard that and you said, you know what, this guy just said taking out Bob Whitaker could cause chaos all across the United States government. You're very creative. You're very creative. That is not fear-based thinking. That is very creative thought. But don't take out old Bob. You might get into more than you bargained for yourself. Old Bob's on our side. But that's very creative. Very creative. If you're a woman at CIA agent, you said to yourself, well, there's no way he's going to use... That's right. You're a good analyst. You did your job. I would never use cops, squad cars, stuff like that, but there's nothing wrong. If you're an FBI agent and you want to defend yourself verbally and you say, you know, in your opinion, that's racist. You're just saying it because I'm white. In your opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with stating the obvious. And that's how it works. You state it over and over again because, believe it or not, most of these guys in these different movements, and I don't get into movements, I get into struggles, but most of these guys in these movements out there afraid to death of government agents are way more afraid of you than you are of them. Believe it or not, because most of them have all these interdepartmental conflicts, and that's part of the dynamic conflict model. They have all these different ethnic pressures. You know, they're always trying to do all these crazy things in government agencies. Every crazy thing they did to you in public school, they're doing 3 times more in a government agency and driving these guys up the wall. And every other day they got a new enemies list who's 1,000 names long that's impossible for them to get to all of. And your average police officer on the beat is not as afraid because they actually have well, I wouldn't say they have less to do. They have a lot of pressure and whatnot, but you know those can be high stress environments too, depending. But you know, a lot of police officers are not in you know, unless you're in an urban area, you're pretty much in a police force that's by and large European. But even then, you know, it can be a little dicey. But there's nothing wrong with defending yourself verbally if you're a fireman, if you're a male. But typically, none of my tactics until it's time to throw what I call throwing in jackrabbits or roll into power would have anything to do with males other than putting you on message, being able to defend yourself. That's the funny thing about it. White females become totally fearless. Most of the crime statistics prove that. It's not that they're naive or stupid. You just think they are. One of the problems for the social engineers, if you do your homework and actually talk to the bigwigs, is they do not cooperate. You just think they're brainwashed. You just think they're cooperating. Sure, someone will marry a ball player making $100 million a year. Sure, in multiracial children, you know, are at what, 2, 3, or 4 million. That's nothing. That's nothing. That's a failure. They would have had these numbers where they are in 1978 or 9. They predict. It's a failure. It's the greatest colossal failure in the history of the world. It is epic failure. Second generation communism will go down as $100 trillion disaster. It is a failure. And it's attempted genocide on record too, which that's a whole nother story. I went into that before and I'm going to go into that again because most people don't understand how profound this stuff is. Most of the white nationalists and whatnot are looking to take power. They don't see the openings. It's very obvious to someone like Bob or someone like me, and I'm going to go into the mantra when I first saw the mantra. But ethnic conflict models are something that everyone in the world has seen, but most people don't know what they're looking at. Every single male on this planet right now is in one way, shape, or form. If you're in Anglosphere, if you're even in Europe to some degree, if you're in Russia, you're in a proper ethnic conflict model. If you're an FBI agent, you're in a dynamic conflict model as well as an ethnic conflict model. In a dynamic conflict model encompasses all the above. I call it that with diversity and multiculturalism and perversity and everything else. But so let's talk about dynamic conflict models and ethnic conflict models. Let me give you some background so we can have an intelligent conversation about that. What is an ethnic conflict model? An ethnic conflict model is where you basically create controlled conflict to ensure stability among the top elite. It is ancient, I believe, but the modern version was pretty much perfected in where you think of as Northern Ireland. Yes, Northern Ireland, long ago, they created an artificial border. They created a border to Northern Ireland. Now, if you're Scotch-Irish, you say, well, that's not an artificial border. We voted for that. Well, I mean, we fought for that. Well, that's true, but that's part of the ethnic conflict model. You imported a bunch of Scots who are ancient cousins. You give them